Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof, for the 19th of August 2023. Please check out my first part if you haven't seen it as of yet. We start with the second part with a frontline update. It's just a very quick synopsis of what has happened up and down the front line before I do my full frontline update. As you can see, not a lot of changes from yesterday's mapping. Some gains in the Robotna area, as according to my mapping sources, but that's not to say there aren't gains from either side. It's just they're not recorded on my two main sources there. Anyway, just a dip into Poulet Volant, who uses Andrew Perpetua as his mapping source, showing all of the gains, I think, over the since the beginning of the counteroffensive. And we have major gains in the Velika Novosilka salient, or the sector, the Malatok Machka sector, and you can see how close Tokmak is actually to this area, and we're going to come on to that in a little while. The Vasilivka sector, that's the Zaporizhia front line, and then we go a little bit further to see some gains near Vuhledar, some gains just south of Mariinka up there. So we're going actually in an anti-clockwise fashion. This is then going up to Avdiivka, some gains around the Novelska area, just a little bit there and a little bit further to the south as well. There are gains for the Russians as well. There are sort of gains and counter gains, as you can see, indicated by the map here. Some gains to the large gains to the south and to the north of Bakhmut. There are sort of counter gains as well, as I've said. So we then come up to the north, and this is where the Russians have been doing fairly well in taking these portions of area back. Some quite large areas taken, but actually some of that then subsequently retaken, and the result being, quite some area of gains for the Russians there. And then here around the Liman area, some small gains for the Ukrainians. Every yellow point here, every yellow label is a gain for the Ukrainians. Every red one is a gain for the Russians. And then I think the black might be gains and then subsequent regains. We'll see in the... Oh, there it has. Oh, no, that's interesting. So gains in red and yellow, losses in black and blue. Yep, so... that is what I was saying, actually. Right, anyway, those maps are fairly useful. I might look at them in my frontline update a little bit more closely. Right, as I've said in the first video today, a little bit from Mark Milley. Actually, he adds to what he said, which is Ukraine can liberate all its territories militarily, but it will be a long, hard war with heavy casualties. Nothing that you don't know already, right? The US and Germany are too slow to help Kyiv. An ex-commander of the US ground forces in Europe, Ben Hodges, says, "Does the West want Ukraine to win? My faith in this is drying up," the Lieutenant General admitted in an interview to Tagesspiegel. This is because he wants the Ukrainians to be provided with everything as soon as possible, and it seems to be so difficult to extract everything from the Allied forces, and it comes in dribs and drabs after a lot of don't know, not sure. Okay, we'll give it. Well, all that time you were umming and ahhing, lives were lost, and it's frustrating for a lot of people who support Ukraine. Okay, what has happened? This is going up to the north. This is in a place called Kislivka, which is up in that Kupiansk front, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kremina. Slight Russian advance noticeable. Kislivka, 3 square kilometers added to the area there, not too distant from Svatova. Here we have it going now all the way down to Uruzhaini. So there's just not a lot of information coming out from places like Bakhmut. I was speaking to Andrew Perpetua yesterday saying, look, what is going on around Klishchivka? Because the Russians keep saying that they have retaken Klishchivka, which is that area to the south of Bakhmut. We've got Bakhmut here on the eastern front. We're going into Bakhmut. We go to the south. It claims that the Russians took back Klishchivka. That's come from Russian sources. Someone like Andrew Perpetua doesn't agree with that. And he says, well, he's heard nothing, and none of his shelling analyses seem to indicate that. So it just seems at the moment I would suggest that it's just Russian bravado, bluster. They haven't done that, and it would seem, as I've said before, really bizarre if they fought to take this back when this is just prime target for shooting fish in a barrel. And they've got a pretty good defensive line along this railway line, and that's why the Ukrainians have stalled for the last week. Is because actually this is acting as a pretty decent barrier, and they're dug in on the embankment there. Uh, I just don't know that there's any value in the Russians taking Klishchiivka back. It is a problem for the Ukrainians to remain there. I'd say it's probably safely a grey zone because the Russian artillery can hit Klishchiivka really successfully as well as the Ukrainians. Uh, right, Ukrainian artillery, that being. Okay, so we are now going down to Uruzhaini in the south. So just to remind you where that is, we have the front line, come past Donetsk, come past Vuhledar, and onto the Velika Novosilka salient, where they've taken the most land back. You can see the white line is the pre-counter-offensive Russian defensive line, and this is the area where the Ukrainians have had most success territorially. And they seem to be continuing having some success around here, although there's no mapping changes according to these two sources. They have been making some gains, as according to other sources. South of liberated Uruzhaini, the Ukrainians have advanced further to the south. So actually, I mean, that's pretty much what I have on my map anyway, which is the Russian defensive line here. I mean, what you can have, you see, are advances, and I've said this many times, sorry to repeat myself, but you can have advances that won't signify any movement of the Russian defensive line because they're advances into the grey zone that were previously kind of contested, and now the Ukrainians. So, for example, that doesn't shift the Russian defensive line; they're still hanging around there. This is what the Russians control. There was just this area where nobody really controlled it. It was fierce fighting, and now, in this case, the Ukrainians have moved further to the south and eaten into that grey zone. Uh, but that would make no changes to here, even to this map, even though the Ukrainians have technically advanced and taken more territory firmly under their control. Right, this is talking about Kremenchuk. So Kremenchuk is to the east of Uruzhaini, or southeast. It's this settlement there, and if that is liberated by the Ukrainians, that's a real problem for the Russians because it means Novodonetsk and Novomayorsky are kind of stuck out a little bit and much harder to supply and keep defending, particularly Novodonetsk. But it also means this trench line that is sitting below Staromilnyivka is under threat as well. And it's also Kremenchuk is a bit of a road hub, as in it's a junction there that goes east to west and also north to Novodonetsk. So it is a useful little settlement to take. The update there, and this appears to be coming from Russian sources. Russians report success for the Ukrainians in that area, in addition to flanking Staromilnyivka and eventually the road that leads to Mariupol. The Kremenchuk area is situated on key heights, will certainly accelerate the defeat of the Russian grouping. The Russian source says in the Vuhledar sector, or the Uladar, I don't know if that's Vuhledar, or that is their name for Kremenchuk. The armed forces of Ukraine, with the support of artillery, attacked near Pryutny. No success, but similar actions on the part of Harvest, that's Uruzhaini, led to the advance in the direction of Kremenchuk. Actually, no, so that's what Kremenchuk is. In this settlement, there are key heights throughout the Vuhledar direction. So that's definitely Vuhledar. So that might be another transliteration or Google translation of it that's a bit dodge. So just to remind you where Vuhledar is, that is over here. So that could be why it's meaning in that direction from Staromilnyivka here. But yeah, so this is proving possibly more, more of a boon for the Ukrainians than maybe Pryutny, that seems to be holding out. The Russians successfully defending that for quite some time now. Moving on to another source, Osin Uri says, update on Staromayorsky and the Mariupol axis. The Ukrainians are concentrating on 4 key areas in the region. Russian sources describe the situation as difficult. The battle for Staromilnyivka has begun. If the Tuvan degenerate, so that will be the Shoigu, the defense minister, that's how Russians see him because he's of an ethnic, he's Tuvan, and they're not very kind to him, surrenders it to, it will already be a strategic defeat, which will mark the complete collapse of the front in the Zaporizhia direction. Wow. So that is saying the importance of Staromilnyivka here to the Russian defense of this entire region. That's something that we said many times before. Priyutne, Ukrainians are increasing their efforts to capture and pressure Priyutne from the north to secure their right flank. Once captured, they will continue moving southward to secure Remivka and Volodne. That is Priyutne here, Remivka there. That is what the Ukrainians would like. That Priyutne seems to be, annoying for the Ukrainians because it means they're unable to take this whole area there, which is mined along the ravines. That's the line there, and so they can't really get into this area from the north. They have to come in from the sides. That's why they need Priyutne and they need Zavitne, Bazhanya, and this will help them in this whole area, of course. Right, to continue, going on to Zavitne Bazhanya, Ukrainians are advancing southward from Staromyrsky, west of the Mokry Yali River towards Zavitne Bazhanya. Once captured, they will continue moving southwards towards the western part of Staromylyivka and to assist in securing Volodne. And Staromylyivka itself, Ukrainian units are advancing southward from Uruzhaini, east of the river, towards Staromylyivka. Indications are that they have begun to engage Russian occupiers on the northern outskirts of the settlement with the primary goal of securing the Kremenchuk road prior to focusing on the capture of Staromylyivka. Note, yesterday, Ukrainian units clearing the agricultural areas south and east of Uruzhaini came under Russian artillery fire and sustained significant losses. However, they did manage success, but at a high cost. The debate is whether the Russians are getting their stuff together along the lines of communication or the Ukrainians really effed it all up. Cope or not, most Ukrainian military analysts are leaning towards the latter. So the Ukrainians obviously took some losses in this eastern area, but they are trying to. The claims are that they could be fighting here in the northern areas of Staromylyivka. That would be pretty significant. It might be that they're coming down this road and not bothering to go into Zavetny, where they have to cross the river there. So there's the river. Possibly, I talked about whether that bridge might be blown up by the Russians to stop the Ukrainians crossing the river, and that leaves that somewhat safe from attack because the river comes to the north and to the east. But it could be that Ukrainians are just bypassing the settlement to hit Staromylyivka. The claims are that they might have lost quite a few troops in so doing. And then finally, Novodonetsk, which is just up to the northeast there, as you might well know by now. The Ukrainians are pressuring Novodonetsk from the northwest to secure their left flank. Once captured, they will continue moving southwards to secure Kremenchuk. Well, actually, I think they're also coming at Kremenchuk from the kind of northwest anyway, rather than through Novodonetsk. So that is a bit of analysis on that area. If we go to the west to Robotna, here the pro-Russian mapper Suryat Map says the Ukrainian army is continuing making small advances in the northern part of Robotny. The town is suffering a huge damage because of artillery fire from both sides. In addition, I'm amazed that you care about how that town is. I wonder if you care so much about, I don't know, Chernihiv being hit by ballistic missiles, Zaporizhia being hit by S-300s continually, the destruction of Bakhmut. Anyway, the town is suffering huge damage. In addition, troops have made small advances at the 808 highway some kilometers northeast. That's towards Novopokrovka. Just to let you know where that is on my map. If we come to the west here, we have Robotna there. That the Ukrainians appear to have most of the settlement under their control, and gains going towards Novopokrovka. And that's according to Suryat Maps, and it appears Andrew Perpetua as well there, as according to colour of that pin. So that is the situation around Robotna, according to them. Global War Monitor says that Ukraine now controls the northern part of Robotna. So again, this is a case of moving it from grey zone to control. There are differing claims as to how much of Robotna is controlled by the Ukrainians. The Russians are definitely in control, or have been in control of the south. Obviously, today fighting would have already been taking place. Things might have changed. The armed forces of Ukraine have advanced and consolidated along several forest belts south of the Robotno-Verbovo road. Fighting continues within the grey zone. So this is to claim that the Ukrainians have made some gains in this area towards Verbove and the forest areas. There are several forest areas that could qualify here. There are forest areas, obviously, to the north east of Robotna, and then some to the south as well here. But there may be some others on the way to Robotna as well. It's quite difficult to tell, especially this is 2018 mapping from Google Earth at the moment, so it's not the most recent map, unfortunately. Right, so that is that source, and then this is a claim from CBS that I thought, really? The Ukrainians overcame Russian minefields and entered the battle for the liberation of Tokmak, says CBS. A US official told CBS News that Ukrainian forces have overcome Russian minefields north of Tokmak and are now fighting the first line of defense, Russian defenses holding the city. I was like, I think that's a bit too positive. And then, if you remember, I said earlier, look how close Tokmak is. Actually, Tokmak is only 20 kilometers away here. This is not a long way from the fighting. And I was saying the other day how Tokmak is now in artillery range. That is just 20 kilometers from that front line. And so actually, yeah, they are fighting in these areas here where there are claims that they've got through the worst of the minefields. And this arguably could mean you might see an acceleration in territory gained, and it could be that the Ukrainians do start really causing an issue for Tokmak. There are defenses built right around Tokmak. So, it'll be difficult to get in there, but they don't necessarily need to get into Tokmak. In fact, arguably, they definitely don't want to do that. They don't want to do these big urban fights. But if you can just absolutely hammer key military installations with artillery, then, job done there. So that is not as overblown as I initially was thinking. So, and then the kind of idea that the counteroffensive might be going a little bit slowly. So I live in rural western Ukraine. Last year in March, people were preparing to defend themselves with hunting rifles and Molotov cocktails. The idea that we'll give up now because the counteroffensive hasn't proceeded with the speed that some foreign journalists expected is absurd. This is a really good point here. The Ukrainians will prevail. It just might not be as quickly as some Western analysts and journalists might have wanted or might have expected, but it's not like, oh, we failed here, now we might as well give up. You had people that were ready to give their own lives in the far west of Ukraine. And I've been thinking about how many Molotov cocktails there must be in people's basements. You had people constructing stuff in Lviv thinking, right, we're in trouble. People, gearing themselves up all over Ukraine. Well, we've got some fighting going on here where the Russians are putting up some stiff resistance, but it's not like, oh, we're not going as quickly as possible, therefore, everyone give up. Let's give the whole country to Russia. It's, no, it's not going to happen. Right. Okay. Moving on to military aid quickly. Rheinmetall. This is the German core military industrial defense entity that is ready to rent old tank factories in Ukraine in order to build new ones on their bases, says CEO Armin Perpiger. I think this is one of the most important components of the Ukrainian defense at the moment, Rheinmetall. They seem to be, they're a big sort of American concerns as well, but like these guys have a locality to Ukraine that means that they can just come into Ukraine, build some factories, help do this, sort out Leopard 2 repair and all that kind of stuff. They are so important. Things like Skynex, all these new bits of kit coming online. Rheinmetall is just really important. According to him, the first 12 employees of the plant who will work in Ukraine have begun training in Germany, with another 12 to join them. So they're really, gearing up Rheinmetall. Right. Ukraine's Mikhailo Fedorov, we are sending more than 270 Ukrainian-made Vampire strike drones. I mean, just look at all these drones behind them. And an army of drones to the front. They can carry up to 15 kilograms of payload. So you're thinking those FPV drones carry 2.5 kilograms, basically. They're the RPG 7 warheads that you often see attached to them. Um, Imagine being able to multiply that, out to get 15 kilograms of payload. That is significant. The military will use them to destroy vehicles, tanks, and enemy defense structures, fortifications, and ammunition depots. That is a good, yeah, evolution of the capability of these drones in terms of what they can do, how much stuff they can hold. And we saw already that flying them through windows to hit surveillance targets is pretty impressive. And continuing on a drone theme, here we have the Armed Forces of Ukraine will use Ukrainian Skynight 2 drones with artificial intelligence and maximum payload of 2.5 kilograms. So that's similar to the first person view drones, said the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. The drone is quite fast, powerful, and quiet, as well as easy to control. In case of loss of communication or jamming by enemy electronic warfare, the drone will still fly to the target indicated by the operator. This is massively important. There are some drones that can do this, where they can still use kind of other guidance, inertial, whatever, to still hit the target even if they are successfully jammed. That gives them an advantage over many other types of drone. Okay, Rheinmetall will start servicing tanks in Ukraine by the end of August. Sorry, that should have been earlier on the back of my other Rheinmetall piece. That is fantastic. They don't have to take those tanks all the way then to Poland or Germany to get them fixed up. They can do it in their own country and hopefully, relatively close to the front line. I don't know. It'd probably be in the far western outreaches of the country, but this is similar to the Rheinmetall situation. So, some statements about the potential production of the Swedish CV90 on the territory of Ukraine in the future. This may be many years away, but it might not. Starting talks with the Swedish Prime Minister, says Zelensky. We have a broad agenda, but defense cooperation is one of the top priorities, including powerful Swedish CV90s. Our warriors are already putting them to good use in the battlefield. We also intend to produce them in Ukraine. Wow. But again, how long till that is a reality? The Canadian Armed Forces showed how their combat engineers train Ukrainian sappers in Poland. Excellent. And Spanish instructors escort Ukrainian fighters home after they finish training inside the country. Now we see a lot of these. However, and this is fantastic, they are getting all this NATO training. It is worth, I'm going to share this segment with you later, which is someone who's involved in training in Kharkiv. And he is a British guy who works for this organization that does a lot of military training. It's a non-profit organization, but he has previously fought in Ukraine himself and just knows the lay of the land. And a lot of feedback about the NATO training is not really good enough. As in, a lot of the people, if they've fought before already, so that NATO training is good if you've never fought before. If you're fresh as a civilian being thrown into that training, then all good and well. But if you've done a couple of rotations on the front line, saying that the people are getting this training is like, yeah, it's not adapted to our needs, and this training is basic stuff, and actually we're more knowledgeable and experienced in fighting than the people training us. I mean, that's the reality. Like, how many NATO soldiers have actually been fighting in the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years? You'll have a few that might have had experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? But the sort of warfare that the Ukrainians are involved in now, very few, if any, NATO trainers will have had that experience, like proper trench warfare, tank on tank engagements, mining to the degree. The guy here was talking about how one person was talking about one Ukrainian soldier being trained on demining in Germany. He said to the NATO instructors, how do we get around? How do we negotiate these minefields? And they're like, "Oh, just drive to the left or to the right of them." It's like, you do realize there's like 700 kilometers in a row or whatever of like heavily mined fields. There is no to the left and right. It's just mines. So again, this isn't quite adapted to our needs. So it's great that the NATO are providing this, of course, but there was call for a lot more feedback, taking on board the feedback from the Ukrainians and adapting the training accordingly. Right? Geopolitics. Russian war against Ukraine cannot be an exclusively European problem, Joe Biden has said. There's been such an invasion there hasn't been such an invasion since the Second World War. Russia has already lost. It cannot achieve its initial goal, which it declared. It is impossible, he said at a tripartite summit with the Prime Minister of Japan and South Korea. This is massively important, in my opinion. A lot of kickback from American critics, particularly on the fringes in the US, talks about this. This is a European war. It's like, yeah, it's not. It's not. You need to understand how connected the world is, both in terms of security, in terms of the geopolitical strategies, geopolitical chess board, but also in terms of economics, right? If you want the US to remain the top, for example, the top of the hegemony, not for example, because they are the only ones at the top of the global hegemony, the supreme power, then actually, everything that happens around the world, broadly speaking, is important. And things that happen in Europe are even more important, because Europe is a huge area of stability and economic power that the US want to be working with rather than against. And so, if Russia and China and BRICS are challenging to take over that hegemony from the US, then this is very much a US interest. It's a global war, this, even though it's taking part in Ukraine, apparently just between two entities. It is not. This involves the whole world in a really, really meaningful way. Okay. Speaking kind of which, talking about American fringe positions, right? Vivek Ramaswamy. Honestly, if any of you guys out there are Republican, which I know sort of a lot of my US viewers are, don't vote for this guy. Just don't do it, and I'm sure you won't if you think Ukraine is important. As Chris Owicki here says, years of Russian efforts to influence the American right are paying off. Jim Acosta from CNN says, during my interview with Ramaswamy, he reiterated his position, and this actually genuinely makes me angry, by the way, that he would allow Putin to keep parts of Ukraine, block Ukraine from joining NATO, and even visit Putin in Moscow. I mean, is this guy paid up by the Kremlin? The GOP contender added, our goal should not be for Putin to lose. What? And then look at the chyron at the bottom. China can invade Taiwan after 2028 if I'm elected. Yeah, you can invade Taiwan. It's not a problem. Just you wait to this moment. I'll be elected. Right, job done. Right, okay. No, not yet. Okay, you can invade now. Yeah, go for it. Oh, Putin, you want Ukraine? Hang on. Yeah, you can have it now. Just, have it. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm concentrating on US. It's all about US. America first. Oh, it turns out the whole world's changed, and now we can't do business in the way we wanted, and all our corporations are screwed because actually China and Russia rule the world. Oh, sorry about that. But, America first, although now we're like 12th. You get the point. I'm sort of ranting, but like this kind of positioning is really, really strategically naive for someone who wants to be a US president, in my personal opinion. You may disagree. Let me know. Bulgarian minister says we cannot rule out a clash between NATO and Russia in the Black Sea. Bulgaria works to prevent tensions from escalating in the Black Sea, but an open clash between NATO and Russia cannot be ruled out, said the defense minister on the 18th. Asked whether there is a possibility of a confrontation between the alliance and Russian forces in the Black Sea, the minister said, we cannot rule out such an option. We are working to prevent it. Russia constantly provokes NATO. It does. Yeah. Turkish companies are creating a ghost fleet from old ships, helping the Russian Federation bypass sanctions and finance the war in Ukraine. This is also a problem in Greece. Greek are a massive maritime cargo nation, and they are also facilitating Russia to get around all these loopholes in terms of sanctions. And there needs to be something done about such companies, Turkish and Greek companies, and I'm sure many others as well, aiding Russia so that sanctions are rendered somewhat impotent. Anyway, that's the end of my second part. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Take care, and I'll get a frontline update and hopefully an extra to you later.